know when it's ready. If you go right at 8 o'clock. Okay, great. We're coming up now to 8 o'clock, Carm.
Okay.
Can you see the chat? Keenan's going to give you a cue when you're live.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Gathering for Justice ongoing virtual town hall series. My name is Carmen Perez Jordan, and I am the president and CEO of the Gathering. For those of you who don't know, the Gathering for Justice was founded by the legendary Harry Belafonte in 2005 after he saw a story on the news about a 5-year-old Black girl in Florida being handcuffed in her kindergarten class for throwing a tantrum. After realizing that children of color were being brutalized by police across the nation, despite the work of the civil rights movement, Mr. Belafonte brought together elders and youth from across the United States to form a covenant to end child incarceration and to dismantle the system of racism in our justice system. I actually was one of those young people 15 years ago. The Gathering will celebrate our 15th anniversary at the end of August with 15 days of programs and events. And so I hope you will follow us at NY Justice League or at Gather4 Justice on Twitter and Instagram, and sign up for our mailing list at gatheringforjustice.org so that you could keep tuning in. And now let's get the program started. On behalf of the Gathering, I want to thank all of you so much for joining us for We Keep Us Safe, a virtual town hall on police brutality and state violence. Over the next 90 minutes, I will be joined by some of the country's leading organizers and activists on the front lines of the movement to defund the police. We will also hear from the family members of Marley Graham, Botham J, Sean Monterosa, and Delron Small, along with advocates who work closely with them. And we are honored to be able to introduce to you Jacob Servin, a young Latino man from Stockton, California, and Akbar Rogers, a Black man from Long Island, New York, both of whom are recent survivors of police brutality. Since the murder of George Floyd on Memorial Day, it seems that the nation has finally started to catch up to the realities of police brutality and state violence against people of color. And I'm here to say to all of you, welcome to the movement. We need you. First up tonight, we thought it would be important to give you all a brief history of policing in America. To join me in this conversation is somebody who I love very deeply. And I'm happy to welcome Bria Baker, a member of Justice League NYC and the racial justice organization Inspired Justice. Bria is joining us from Atlanta. Hey, Bria.
Hey, Carm. Thank you so much for having me. I mean, it always feels full circle being able to facilitate with you because Justice League and the Gathering for Justice was the political home that gave me so many of the tools to allow me to even know some of the things to share. So just thank you for your leadership and your cultivation. And I'm so excited to be doing this brief history of policing, emphasis on the brief, which is to say that we could talk about this for hours and hours and probably days, really, if we're being honest. But I just want to talk about an overview of what reform has looked like, because we've been trying to reform American policing for the last several centuries. And so we're going to just look at what policing, even in the construction of policing, how it began. And recognizing the systems of oppression it's built on. So first and foremost, we talk about policing like it's been something we've had since the beginning of time. But especially in the US, we hadn't had policing obviously since colonialism. And in the 16th century, 17th century, even like 18th century, policing was just night watches. And it was really informal vigilante style, which gives way to the George Zimmermans, right? But just this idea that community members would volunteer to keep the community safe. And that community policing transitioned into a more formal version of policing around the 1800s, which is also around the time that the institution of slavery was beginning to crumble. And from the very beginning, this institution of policing was really rooted on protecting white people's capital. And at that time, Black people, Indigenous people, Latinx people, we were all considered a part of that capital or a hindrance to that capital. And so we became the thing that needed to be policed as well. But the first police were slave patrollers. And that was like in the 1700s. And the slave patrollers were to chase down fugitive enslaved people, but also to enforce law on plantations. So we don't really talk about that either, but the idea of overseers outsourcing the protection and the policing of the labor source to policemen and to the slave patrollers. And then after the Civil War, this just became even more fortified. And this idea that for us to be able to control and protect American capitalism and where the US was going as an industrial leader, there was this huge emphasis on vigilante style organizations, police being one of those, the KKK and the White Citizens Council being other versions of that, to really enforce Jim Crow segregation. And I think another thing that's important for us to remember about the Civil War was even when we had, the slave patrollers, policing then was not rooted around the idea of crime as we know it. Crime was sort of created. It's a social construct very similar to race and gender, in that crime was created to give an excuse to incarcerate. And the idea that the US would not be where it is today without unpaid labor. And what was the US going to do when they were forced to pay people? And this loophole, which those of you who watched Ava DuVernay's 13th on Netflix know, the loophole of the 13th Amendment was, if we can get people to believe that these people are monsters and criminals, and we criminalize all of the different things that we do, now we have a built-in labor force. And so after the Civil War is the first time things like trespassing and vagrancy, walking on certain sides of the sidewalk, disobeying Jim Crow rules became a form of crime. And the bigger that need was, the more expansive that view of crime became. And so this carceral state just grew and grew and grew. And the whole time that this is growing, and is being used to oppress Black people and continue to keep us subjugated, we're also seeing police expanding into the union busting. And this idea that, wait, if police are here to protect capital, then police can protect our property, police can protect us from our workers, police can protect us from this movement that is saying we deserve more than being exploited. And so all of this is a form of social control. And it just continues to snowball and snowball into something deeper. So in the 60s and 70s, we see this criminalization of hippie culture and the sexually liberated folks of that time, but also of activists, followed by COINTELPRO and the FBI's intention to subvert Black and brown and red-led social justice movements by defining them as terrorists, which, I mean, we're seeing all of these things happen right now across the country, in Portland, Detroit, Chicago, New York City, with Black activists being labeled as extremists. And so this social control is really important because, again, it all ties back to how can we use this social control to profit us? You know, obviously there are some people who are out there that are just malicious, but the average person is not investing this much time in building this elaborate system of mass incarceration for nothing, but for there to be a way to profit off of it. And so what was originally the carceral state, which right after the Civil War in the late 1800s, early 1900s, was, you know, coal miners and people who were incarcerated being rented out to industries like that, then became, okay, wait, we can rent these laborers out to private corporations. We can have incarcerated people making your bras and your computers and make that so built into the fabric that we convince people it's a part of their rehabilitation. And so I've been, you know, I've been spitting a lot to y'all, but it's important that we remember the roots of this so that we are vigilant of the ways that detention is being positioned to us and repackaged to us. So now criminal justice is sexy. We all want to talk about bail reform, but we're seeing that our Black and brown sisters and brothers and siblings who are undocumented and are coming from all parts of the world, including but not limited to Latin America, we're seeing that as a new form of detainment. We're seeing this, okay, if criminal justice is not appropriate anymore, it is not cool, let's just expand criminality to include those who are traveling for a better life. And many of us, including people of color, have become a part of the cog that says, okay, well, I'm down to not be the one who's mass incarcerated as long as there's someone else that is that brunt force. And so we just have to remember that all of our liberation is bound in one another's, that the same systems of oppression that are being weaponized against us are being weaponized against other communities. The same systems that said we can exploit free labor at the expense of Black people is doing that same thing to brown people from Latin America, the Middle East, South Asia, et cetera. And so we need to know those linkages, because when we know better, we do better.
Thank you so much for that, Bria. I know that you and I talk a lot about this, kind of the parallels between Black and brown people, right? And so we've also talked a lot, especially some of the teachings from my father, who was a 94-year-old man who was born in California in 1924, and his family being here. And so I want to also provide some history of some of the lynching that happened in the Mexican community. And so although the lynching of African Americans in the Deep South is heavily documented, few people know about the history of a similar kind of lawless violence against Mexicans in the West. Some of the victims have been lynched, burned alive, whipped, or shot just for being of Mexican heritage. And many of the victims were actually US citizens. These were my father's ancestors. And some of the acts of violence even drew crowds of spectators in thousands. Historians have cataloged 597 lynchings of persons of Mexican origin or descent in the United States, and stress that this is a conservative estimate. The locations of most of these cases were in Texas, about 282, in California, about 188. Actually, I went to UC Santa Cruz, and there were people of Mexican descent that were lynched in Santa Cruz, Arizona, 59, and New Mexico, 49. Breaking down the incidents, researchers have found that the 31-year period between 1848 and 1879 had an astonishing lynching rate of 473 per 100,000 people. In 1918, a group of Texas Rangers, US Army cavalry soldiers, and cattle ranchers raided a Texas town, killing all the men and boys and burning the village to the ground. Often these acts of racial terror have been portrayed as valiant white settlers saving the land from savages and foreigners. Even today, efforts to remember this history has been politically contested to protect the white supremacist version of history in Southwestern states. When you consider the fact that many of our families were indigenous to this land before it was the US or Mexico, we often say the border didn't cross us, or we didn't cross the border crossed us. And you view these acts of mob violence side by side with things like forced boarding schools to separate indigenous children from their families, and the forced deportations of US citizens of Mexican heritage. That was something that happened to my father's family in 1930 under the Repatriation Act. What we see is a state of violence that is chilling. Latinos as well often get pitted against our Black siblings in very visceral ways. In prisons, we see that a lot with race riots, in the community, in politics, and subsequently, we don't always see our issues facing the Black community as our own. The truth is that we have more in common, and this shared history is a big part of why we bear the burden of struggles with police brutality and lawless killings. According to the Washington Post, there's more than 5,000 fatal police shootings since 2015 that have impacted Latinos. Latinos are the second largest demographic killed by police. Just last month, and we will hear from one of the family members, we will hear from family members from one of the 3 unarmed men, Latino men, that were killed by police in California. Within 2 weeks, we will be hearing, also, when we also think about and look at the killings at the hands of ICE agents and the systemic blind eye turn to killings at the border, the numbers would even be greater. So while raising awareness about the history of Latinos and how we have also been impacted by not only incarceration, but also lynchings and police brutality, it's also important for us to continue to organize and center Black lives. Cesar Chavez has said, preservation of one culture means no disrespect to another. Each of us is better equipped to show up as our full selves when we have a clear understanding of self-identity and where we come from. I've had the opportunity to travel internationally to listen to the experiences of Afrodescentes in Venezuela, in Cuba, El Salvador, and Mexico, as well as Germany. And I have also seen how manifestations of anti-Blackness like police harassment, radicalized exploitation, and social exclusion are a problem without borders. It is also time for my fellow Latinos to confront the racism, the shadism, and the anti-Blackness that actually exists within our community. Not only do I welcome you to do that, I am doing it with you, and I will consistently show up to do that as well. I believe that once Black people are truly free, our world will be free of the many other manifestations of hate that deny people of their full humanity. And so I thank you, Bria. It's always a pleasure to be with you. But I also thank all of you for really listening to what Bria and myself have been saying, and how if we come together, we're able to really dismantle the systems of oppression that affect us every single day. So thank you again, Bria, for joining us. Now we will move into our segment with directly impacted people who are leading the movement. But first, I'd like to welcome two women whom I share a special bond, a sisterhood with, to give us an update about the actions on behalf of Breonna Taylor. Linda Sarsour, who we love so much, is an author, an award-winning racial justice and civil rights activist. She's a seasoned community organizer and a mother of three. She is the co-founder of Empower Change, co-founder of Until Freedom, and one of the 4 national co-chairs of the 2017 Women's March on Washington, and one of our original Justice League members. I also want to welcome Tamika, who is a nationally recognized and award-winning civil rights leader, a mother, the co-founder of Until Freedom, one of the 4 national co-chairs of the 2017 Women's March on Washington, our own past board member at the Gathering for Justice, and one of our original Justice League members. Both these women have made enormous sacrifices in order to accomplish incredible things, fighting for the victims and survivors of police violence, mass incarceration, racial bias in the justice system, and now they are fighting for justice for Breonna. You have heard about the Louisville 87 who were arrested for nonviolent civil disobedience in Kentucky a couple of weeks ago. There's a myth that sometimes goes around about who is or isn't allowed to protest injustice, but I always think about Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail. It's been 138 days without justice for Breonna. And so, Linda and Tamika, as we often say to each other, those who are closest to the problem are also closest to the solution. What's going on in Kentucky? Where are we in the case? And what are some next steps that you could share with the audience?
Go, Linda, go. You go.
No, Tamika gotta go. Go ahead, Tamika.
Listen, we're not gonna fight about this like we fight about everything. Linda's going first.
All right. So first of all, thank you, Carmen, and thank you to the Gathering for Justice and for all of your leadership. You know, we are a trio, and I hope people still know that we moved together. We got each other's back. We're in this work together. We may be in Louisville fighting, and Carmen may be in California, but our hearts are always together. So I'm just honored to just kind of feel like we're doing the same things we used to do all the time together at the Gathering and with the Justice League. So as Carmen said, you know, right now we have became a singularly focused group of people when it comes to justice for Breonna Taylor. We cannot have people in the streets fighting for against racial injustice, fighting to defund police, fighting for all these things which are extremely important, when we cannot even get justice for one Black woman who was murdered in her own home during the night, you know, obviously awoken by the LMPD, who should not have ever been at her house in the first place. What's really important about the updates on this case is, number one, nothing has really happened. One police officer named Brett Hankinson has been fired by the Louisville Police Department, but that's about it, and it's not enough for us. There are multiple police officers involved in this case, and not only the ones who actually showed up at Breonna Taylor's home and actually put the bullets through her apartment and through her body, but also Detective Joshua James, who many people don't talk about, who is the detective who actually lied on the no-knock warrant in order to get those police officers dispatched to the scene of the crime. And so for us right now, the updates are that the local activists in Louisville have been protesting for about 61 days right now. Every single day, the people of Louisville are out on the streets, morning, night, daytime, all the time. There have been multiple actions that have happened. There is an Injustice Park that has been occupied by local activists there. We organized a rally out in Frankfort, which is the capital of the state of Kentucky. We also, as you know, Carmen, engaged in a civil disobedience outside the home of Daniel Cameron in one of the most strategically implemented direct actions that Kentucky probably has ever seen, to the point where people went all the way with us to the lawn of Daniel Cameron's house and did not, in fact, know where we were going. We did not share that information because we did not want anybody, including the Louisville Police Department, to know where we were going. So the next steps in this case is that we need everyone to continue to say Breonna Taylor's name. Breonna Taylor, Breonna Taylor, Breonna Taylor. Remind people to keep uplifting this young Black sister's name, because if we don't get justice for Breonna Taylor, we are continuing a long-standing record of Black women, including Sandra Bland, including Ayanna Stanley Jones, including Rekia Boyd and Eleanor Bumpers and Deborah Danner. And we can sit here, Carmen, for a week and name the many Black women who have been murdered at the hands of the police who have not gotten any justice. So please keep saying Breonna Taylor's name. Also follow us at Until Freedom. We're in fact about to head back to Louisville, because in order for us to feel that we have direct impact supporting local organizers on the ground and bringing our resources. So we're going to be out there for a few weeks starting next week. So if folks want to join us out there, want to be there with us, follow our work, we're going to be doing local community service, uplifting that local community, but also we're going to be engaging in direct action that, of course, we will share details about later. But Carmen already knows, because we've done these kind of actions together, that they will be powerful and that they will be something that brings people together. So we are just so focused right now on Breonna Taylor and getting justice for her and her family.
Linda, I did see something on, I believe it was Until Freedom's account about making a call. Is there a number that folks could call, or maybe that was on somebody else's? It appears as though arrest the cops who killed Breonna Taylor, call 502-735-1784.
Yes. So if you go to untilfreedom.com/Breonna Taylor, all lowercase, you will find numbers to call, emails of people to send emails to. What the city has done, oftentimes they shut down those phone lines because all of you are so amazing that people were calling, hundreds of people were calling, that they actually shut those phone lines down. Sometimes they open them back up just to see if people forgot about Breonna. So, try those numbers, but definitely drop an email, because they will see your email. And they have been flooded. We know people who work on the inside that have been like, wow, there have been weeks where they have gotten thousands of emails of people demanding that the mayor, that the interim police chief do their job. And right now, the most important person in this whole scenario that has a lot of power is Attorney General Daniel Cameron, who many folks should know, he's a Trump supporter, he's a Republican. He's not somebody that is interested in this idea of the movement for Black lives, but he has a lot of power and he needs to be held accountable.
Thank you so much, Linda. We love you. And Tamika, I know Tamika had a quick emergency, but sending you all so much prayers. Please follow.
Thank you. And thank you to our brother Roland for always giving the gathering and all of us this platform to talk to his followers. And so thank you, Carmen, and anything you need, you know where to find us.
Yes, love y'all. Thank you. And now I'm going to bring on our panelists for the next segment this evening, centering the voices of family members who've become activists after losing loved ones to violence. Please join me in welcoming Constance the mother of Ramarley Graham, a Black teenager killed by NYPD in the Bronx in February of 2012. Constance is a member of Justice Committee. And also, we want to bring up Victoria Davis, the sister of Dalron Small, a Black man killed by NYPD officer after a road rage incident on July 4th of 2016. Victoria is also a member of Justice Committee. And Yulsan, who is joining us from Justice Committee, one of the New York City's leading social and racial justice organizations, who we greatly respect and work with on a number of important legislative and policy initiatives. So we're going to start with you, Constance. I want to make sure you're here. Hi, Constance, how are you?
I'm okay. How everybody doing?
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. Please share a little bit about your fight for justice for your son and how you've extended that fight for the children and loved ones of others as well. And then, just give us a little information about that. And also, you worked hard to push for the repeal of 50A, which kept officers' disciplinary records hidden from the public. Tell us about the repeal and where we are with that right now. But first, please share about your son and how you've actually extended that fight to fight for others.
Again, thank you for having me on. My name is Constance Malcolm. My son's name was Ramarley Graham. Ramarley was 18 years old and he was murdered February 2nd, 2012. A little background about what happened. Ramarley was walking home with two friends and he stopped in a bodega and he came right back out. He proceeded to walk up the block. The bodega is on 228th Street. We live on 229th Street. So he proceeded to walk to the block, and then there was two undercover officers on the opposite side of the street observing the bodega. Had nothing to do with Ramarley. So when Ramarley went into the bodega and came out too quickly, they deemed him suspicious. So when he continued to walk, he adjusted his pants because he has one of those belt where they have the little round hoop and then you put it through and then pull it back through. So oftentimes it get loose. So what he did, he pulled his pants up. That's when the two undercover cops say they saw a butt of a gun in his waist. These two undercover cops are Black men. They raided in and to other officers, telling them that Ramarley have a gun. Ramarley walked home. You see Ramarley calmly walking, opened up the door, came inside the house. Couple minutes later, you see the undercover cop rushing up to the door and trying to kick the door in. Unsuccessfully, he couldn't kick the door in from the front entrance. He went to the back entrance and knocked on the door. And there's a young kid, Javion, that lives on the first floor. There's a young kid that lives in the basement that normally comes to the first floor to get help with his homework. So when Eric Dixon, that lives on the first floor, heard the door banging, he told Javion to go look because he thought it was a kid from the basement coming out. So as Javion opened the door, the cop had the back door open. They told stuck the gun in Javion's face and told him to step out. And it was January 2nd. So in New York, that day was very cold. So Javion was even dressed like that to be outside. And then they proceed to run to the house. When they came in the house, Eric Dixon heard the noise. So he remembered that he had sent Javion to the back to see what was going on. So when Javion didn't come back, he proceeded to walk to the back. That's when they stuck the gun in his face. He put his hands up. They ran through his apartment, opened the front door, and let the other cops them in. The other cops them came in, ran up the door, kicked my door in, startled my mom because she heard the commotion, get ready to walk to the door. That's when the door got kicked in. Ramarley was behind her. My son, Chinar Campbell, he was 6 at the time, was behind Ramarley. The gun went off, the shot fired. She thought it was her. She looked, she didn't see any blood. She remembered that Ramarley was behind her. She looked down, she see Ramarley laying on the floor, the bathroom floor, with his foot hanging out the door. Ramarley was dead. When she tried to ask what was going on, they manhandled her, they threatened her, they was gonna shoot her. She didn't shut up. And when she tried to call me, they snatched a phone from her, just basically manhandled her all the way. And Chinar tried to call me also, they took the phone away from him. On the video, you see them brought him outside. He had no clothes on because he had just came from school. He just had a t-shirt on, his underwear. They brought him outside with no clothes on. Well, I got the phone call when I was on my way from work. So I wasn't there. So when I got home, I saw a whole bunch of police, you know, so I went and I told them who I was, gave them my ID and say, I live here, whatever, you know, and it's a whole bunch of back and forth. So they told me that if I could go to the precinct. I said, fine. I went to the precinct. At this time, nobody told me my son was killed, shot, anything. I found out when they took me to the precinct, when they brought my mom in and she blurted out to me, because they call me Little Miss. She said, Little Miss, they killed Marley. And I'm like, she don't know what the hell she's talking about, you know, because she was crying. So then my phone rang and it was Frank with Ramarley's dad, because I had called him when I got the phone call and I was on my way home. He asked me where I was. I told him I was in the precinct. You know, I sort of tell him what was going on. He asked where my mom. I said, she's right here. They want to talk to her. He's like, no. They can't talk to her because she doesn't have a lawyer. Oh, they didn't listen to me. They hush her in the back. And basically I couldn't see her. So I pushed my way back there. I didn't know where they had it. It was like 3 doors. So I started banging on all the doors. One door finally opened. It was 2 officers in there. One came out, the one that assaulted me and the one that had my mom basically hostage in the room. When I couldn't get anywhere with them, I left because I had to find out where my other son was, the 6-year-old son. I left. They held my mom for 7 hours, questioning her, tried to put words in her mouth. She kept on saying her grandson didn't run. They kept on telling her he was out of breath coming in the house. And she's like, no, he was not out of breath. He came in normally, you know, and it was a whole bunch of back and forth they had her in the precinct. So finally, my lawyer showed up and the same nonsense shenanigan going on. We don't know who you're talking about. We don't have her here. You know, it was a whole bunch of runaround that day. Long story short, the officer was charged with manslaughter 1 and manslaughter 2. Then the case got thrown out on a technicality. We all know that don't happen to us, but it happened to cops. They get thrown on a technicality. They told us we could go back to the grand jury or appeal. I chose to go back to the grand jury because I felt I had a strong enough case because we got the first indictment. The second grand jury didn't vote no true bill. So I proceeded with department trial. And that was another headache. I had to fight like hell to get those charges. And they finally found him guilty on the department charges. And he was supposed to get fired. They called him first. They told him he was going to get fired. So he went on his day off on a Sunday and went and resigned. So technically he was not even fired. He resigned. So with all that said, he got off the force, and the sergeant that was there that was supposed to monitor the whole operation, they forced him to retire early. I believe it's 1 year early. And the other officer, the partner, got 1 year probation. I'm gonna go into a little bit about 58 because this is a segment where I feel is very important. These officers, I didn't know who they are. It was Richard Hayes had 60 CRB complaint, 10 allegation within, I think, a 13-month span. So this show you if we had 58 back then, we would have knew this man was a threat. He was basically a renegade person that shouldn't have never been on the force. And he murdered my son. That would have never happened if we had 58 because he probably would have been disciplined and we would have known this charge with a follow-up of what's going on with him. But because we didn't have 58, we didn't know this officer name. And it was 3 years after Ramarley death that we got a leak about his record. So this is to show you, we as family has to rely on leaks to get information about police. This is why it's so critical that we have 58. Because this would tell us who these officers are, if there was ever discipline, what was the disciplinary action, if they were suspended, anything like that, we would have known. So 58 is very important that we have right now. We got 58 passed as a bill, a legislation that passed June 1st. We got 3 bills passed June 1st. That was like amazing because if it wasn't for people up in the street after George Floyd, we probably would have never had it because we've been going to Albany fighting, you know, like crazy with Cuomo to get this bill passed. And every step of the way, Cuomo tried to block it. So when Cuomo and tried to pretend like he did us a favor, he didn't do us no favor because he tried to block this bill for years. But because we were so, you know, bent, like we have to get this bill passed because it affects us as Black and brown people because we hear police kill us every day. None of them get charged. And if they do get charged, like again, it gets thrown out and they back in the street. We don't know nothing about them, where they are located, all of these things we don't know. So when we got this victory, we felt, yes, we finally got something, but now we have to go back to court because the union is trying to fight us on 58. The union, they're very powerful, but we as Black and brown people on the ground, we could get this done again. We could beat them because we got it before. A lot of people didn't think we were going to get it done, and we got it done. So, with this union fighting about they don't want 50A, why you don't want 50A? If you have a person that molests a child, you put their record out, we know where they live and all of this. Don't forget, we are not asking for the police address. That's not what we asking for, because de Blasio tried to make it look like that's what we was doing. Don't get it twisted. We're not looking for the address. We want to know their record on the job. What was their discipline? If they was disciplined when they do something, or, did they lose vacation time? Because we all know that's what happened. They put them on desk duty. They lose probably like a day's pay, and they go about their merry way and go back in the community. We need to know who are in our community. We need to know who are policing us. We don't really need all these police. You hear de Blasio talk about he cut funded $1 billion. We know that's crap. None of that happened. They want us to believe it, and they want us to think because we defund the police by $1 billion, we have all this shooting. No, that's not what happened. We need school for our young kids. You see this summer, this is why we have this uptick in shooting, because our young kids has nowhere to go. They cut in the school funding. We don't have youth program and all these stuff. If we have these programs for our kids, we probably want to have some of these, kids in the street running around, doing God knows what they're not supposed to do. So we want to let people know that, and we have also got the special prosecutor, where we take away the power from the DA and give it to the Attorney General when it comes to police shooting. Because again, we all know the police and the DA, they work hand in hand every day. So they're not going to want to send one of their people to jail. So we took away that power from them. So no, any shooting or questionable shooting, it goes to the Attorney General, or anybody dies in custody while being arrested, it goes to the Attorney General. So that's very important also for us as mothers or families that's fighting for justice. Because, my case is done. There's nothing I could do again, but I'm making sure my Black and brown boys and girls that are adopted, because these are my kids now, we want to make sure their family don't go through the same thing that I went to. I have to file FOIA requests and, all these papers just to get documents that should have been given to me. I shouldn't have to fight for that. And when we got these documents, they're very heavily doctored. So that's to show you they don't want to give us this information.
That's right.
A lot of people might not know what FOIA information is. It's like when the police do their report, what they write in their report. So you get all those documents. So that's very important, because this is what shows all the lies that they put out, and then the statement that they written down don't even come, it doesn't match. So we, with those things are very important. And also the Police Data Stat Act, that's very important too, because a lot of time when they stop, it shows that it's mostly Black and brown people are being stopped. And where they've been stopped, that means like what neighborhood they are, they are targeting. And we know oftentimes it's Black and brown neighborhood. So that's also very good that we have that. Like I said, the 3-4 victory it's a huge victory for us in New York, because 3 at one time, you rarely probably even seen that. And we did it when they said we couldn't do it, because years ago we had family that fight for the special prosecutor, like the Anthony Baez case and Amadou Diallo case. They fought for the special prosecutor years ago, and it didn't happen because of 9/11. And a lot of people were like, oh, you're not going to get it. Y'all will never get it, but we did. So we as Black and brown people, we very powerful. We could get things done. We just got to put our minds together and work together. Forget about this bickering, who's this organization. We all fighting for the same cause. We need to get on one accord and get this stuff done, because we are the ones that are dying every day and we are not getting any justice. We can't have, we need to have transparency when it comes to police, and we don't have that. So we will never have justice. But if we continue to fight, we could make changes, because we've seen it right now and we're in a movement now. This is the time to get what we want done.
Thank you so much, Constance. You are so inspirational. I just want to thank you for all your advocacy and for everything that you have contributed to the movement. And, thank you again for also sharing the story of Ramarley. I know that's challenging. And so now we're going to pass it on to Victoria again. Victoria is the sister of Delron Small, a Black man that was killed by New York PD officer after a road rage incident on July 4th of 2016. So Victoria, like others here tonight, you've taken the tragedy of your brother's experience and used it to evolve into an activist and an organizer. What's that been like for you?
It's been many ups and downs. It's been a lot, but anything easy is not worth fighting for. And I see it as anything that's very hard, because it's very hard. It must be worth fighting for. Just as a whole, as a people, liberation and just community is worth fighting for. So actually I have a few things beyond Delron, because I do more than advocacy for Delron. I stand for the people. And so actually I had a couple of things I wanted to highlight. First, I want to demand the firing of Wayne Isaacs. Wayne Isaacs killed Delron. Wayne Isaacs could have drove off. He could have did a lot of things, but he didn't. He was not in imminent danger when he killed Delron. That's like a misconception. He was not in imminent danger. He chose to stop before Delron. Actually, where Delron pulled over, it was my cousin's barbershop. So Wayne Isaacs had ample opportunities to make other decisions. He did not. All Delron did was exit the vehicle and was shot 3 times in front of his 4-month-old son. And so I wanted to speak to people about the difference between community violence and state violence. Oftentimes when people in the community have a transgression, everyone wants them to go to jail, everyone wants them punished. But when a police officer or corrections officer has a transgression, people are reluctant. They're reluctant because they're afraid, they're scared, or how people think of authority, right? Because they don't understand that we have the authority, we have agency, and we have rights to hold these people accountable. And so we have to be very careful when we have conversations regarding community violence and state violence. Lately, I hear a lot of that because of the media. So we have to be careful and fact check the things that we're watching on the media, because the media has their own stuff that they have going on, but we have to make sure that we take care of us. I also wanted to speak about the dangers of gentrification, only because I saw the president's tweets earlier that were like pretty disgusting, right? So, like low income housing, and that's a part of state violence. And so people think that these things are separate, and state violence, police killings, police brutality, those things intersect. They're not separate entities, because when we have people who are being displaced from their homes and they can't build communities, they don't know the neighbors, they don't know who lives in their building, they can't vouch for the little kids who are coming home from school, then that is a form of state violence when people are being displaced from their homes. And then we see in cases of like Saeed Vassal, where those were not members of the community who called the police on him. The members of the community were comfortable with him. He was well loved. But the people who were not from that community, because that community did experience a lot of gentrification, and it resulted in his death, right? And so we have to care about state violence as a whole. And so that's the type of work that I do. And that's my mission, to teach people about state violence and building community as a whole. Voting, and voting with integrity, with education, voting and knowing who you're supporting. Don't just get in the ballot and check off, oh, they're Black, they're brown, vote after you look into the person's background, look and see what they have done. See if it's a person that you can hold accountable. I know that right now our presidential election is very limited. And so but we shouldn't think of it as the lesser of the evils or the evil that we don't know. I've been looking into it a lot, and I think we should look into it and see it as who can we hold accountable, knowing your elected officials. When I started off our organizing and doing activism with JC, that's what I learned, like how to know the politicians. And I think that that's a very, very important key, to know what these politicians stand for, so that when we're in these booths, we're choosing with knowledge. I believe the last thing that I wanted to speak about is when we're organizing, when we're protesting and we're rallying, we don't have to choose one thing, right? We can walk and chew bubble gum. So we can be out in the streets, but we also can learn policy work, as Constance was stating earlier. Like she has a vast knowledge of policy work. And I think that sometimes people feel like you have to choose one or the other, but we can do all of it. We are people who are very resourceful. We can learn a lot of things. And I think that the climate that we're in right now, with all of these police killings, like we thought that after we watched the video of George Floyd's neck being kneed on, right, that it would stop. These people didn't stop. They just continued, because it's becoming more brazen. And so we have to make sure that we're holding all of these systems accountable and not seeing them as just one entity, because they all intersect. And I'm always free to give more information. I won't hold you guys for too long, but thanks for having me. Thanks for just creating this platform. I think that it's much needed. And yeah.
Yeah, and I want to thank you, Victoria. I know that you are part of, Justice Committee. You're also, part of all these other entities, and you always show up. I'm so grateful for you and Baby Justice, and you show up with your family, you show up with passion, and that's really about, what Constance was saying. It's not really about the organization, the entity of the organization, but it's really about the people, right? And you constantly remind us that relationships are important to you. And I think it's a perfect segue into just the different tactics within the larger strategy, right? We know Justice Committee works directly with the families. We know that they're also advocating for policy. They do press conferences. They have the ability to really engage community in a very unique way. And so Yulsan, you've expressed the importance of Justice Committee's approach to centering the leadership of people who've been directly impacted by police violence, but you also connect this policy piece together for impactful advocacy, making sure that those that are directly impacted by the issue are also advocating and that are also on the front lines. And so please tell us, what are your policy goals beyond Repeal 50 that Constance mentioned earlier?
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. And I want to keep my comments super short, because I feel like there's so many important voices in this segment, and really we need to hear from the families. We've got a lot more work to do. We've had these incredible victories in New York, but we are full on, head on into a campaign to defund the NYPD. And I think that's going to be addressed in a later segment. I do also want to lift up just about these victories, these state level victories that Constance was talking about and that Victoria mentioned, that it was the protest movement in the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade and others that really created the context for us to push these through. But they would not have happened without years of organizing of organizations across the state, Justice League, and other organizations. These campaigns were coordinated by Communities United for Police Reform, our coalition, but they absolutely would not have happened without the leadership of the families, the New York families that are on right now. And I don't just mean that they are the media spokespeople or the face of the campaign. For the Justice Committee, actually, it was the families that told us that these were the legislative priorities. Like, they're the ones that are setting our agenda. And it's the families actually that were on the phone at midnight and past as we were negotiating these bills in the final stretch. And so what I want to say, like the message that I have and the Justice Committee has for any elected officials who may be watching right now, and certainly any elected officials who felt some pressure in the past period, is it is absolutely correct for you to be afraid of the movement with the leadership of the families, and that the families are unified, the families know what changes are needed, and we are in lockstep with them and standing behind them. And I want to say also to all of the activists and organizers and new folks that are watching, that really it is really important to listen to Constance's voice, Victoria's voice, all of the other families, and not just about hearing the stories and feeling the pain, but really listen to what they're saying about how we get this work done. And I think, I feel very honored and humbled to be in the Justice Committee and be able to be following their leadership and supporting, uplifting their leadership. And thank you also to Justice League for creating the space for these conversations.
Thank you so much, Yulsan, for also, being a model to so many of us, and to always showing up and including us in these conversations. I'm going to bring on Elisa Finley, the sister of both Ja, who was killed in September of 2018 by a Dallas police officer who claimed she entered his apartment by accident. Elisa is a co-founder of Sisters of the Movement. Elisa, your brother's case received national attention and you've become an activist because of it. Can you share what you're currently working on, as well as why you feel it's important to also ensure that sisters are included in the conversation? I think you're on mute, Elisa.
So sorry. Currently, we're working on having the street Botham lived on, which is Lamar Street, renamed to the Botham Jub Boulevard. It is, for me, it is very important to have that street renamed because not only it's the location of Southside Flats, but it's also the location of the Dallas Police Department. For me, maybe in a selfish way, I would love for every police officer walking into that building to forever say his name. And what better way to have that done than to have his name on their checks, their letterheads, and every correspondence that comes out of that building. So I'm working hard on that, and I really want to see it happen. Ideally, I would want it to be unveiled on his birthday this year, because I like to remember his birthday and not the day he was killed, even though it's the same September. I will still celebrate his birthday, and that would be, to me, the best birthday gift for him. The second part of your question, I'm sorry, what was it again?
Just the importance of, as we've learned about Mothers of the Movement, and I've had conversations with Victoria, we've talked a lot about why it's also important for sisters to be involved in advocating for the loss of a sibling. Why do you feel that's important?
I think it's important for sisters, for brothers, for siblings in general, because your sibling is your first best friend. Botham and I, we were close. I spoke to him up until his last day on earth, up until he entered his apartment, and that's something we did. We spoke every single day. A lot of times when someone is killed by police officers, the highlight is focused on the parents. But we share that pain. We lose a sibling and we lose a best friend at the same time. So I think it's important to highlight the sisters and the brothers because we feel it. We're in that fight. We want to do something. For me, I don't feel like I could mourn my brother completely until I see something that shows me that, his death was not in vain. So that is my fight right now, to make his death have a purpose. And until I can see that, then the fight is not over.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Elisa. Thank you. We're gonna go ahead and welcome the last two of this segment. And please welcome Ashley and Michelle Monterosa, the sisters of Sean Monterosa, a 22-year-old Latino young man killed by police just last month in Vallejo, California. The loss you both have experienced is so recent, but you've also been both galvanized into action. I felt that, you know, the last two times that I've spoken to you both, and to get justice for your brother and expose the culture of police violence in Vallejo seems to be really important. Tell us a little bit more about that and what motivates you both to keep going. And I know that this is, you know, I have to say, this is a really heartfelt conversation. I'm feeling it just hearing everybody. But again, you know, like I had reached out to you, Michelle, and, you know, I just want to again thank you for responding, because it's not that easy. And to share your brother's story is so important, I know, to not only you, but to so many of us that do this work as well.
Yeah. Well, we just want to say thank you to you guys for allowing us to even speak. And right now, Alyssa's words just hit me, because it's, you know, it's a wound that's so fresh, but instead of, you know, we all mourn, but we're more on the way that I feel like it's going to help us heal, is to turn our pain into power. And what right now just resonated really close to me, it's like, you know, we want our brothers to have a purpose. We don't want these pigs to just be like, well, that's another band on my badge. So in Vallejo PD, we just found out yesterday that they had this weird tradition within the force when they murder. They have been murdering men in Vallejo. There's been 37 men.
Since 1997.
And all those officers, they have a slight bend on their badge, and it's a weird cult ritual.
To initiate how many bodies they've all had.
And they caught on a body. Jared Ton, who murdered Sean on June 2nd, must have his first bend. But there are other officers in there who have caught other bodies. You know, they've murdered 4 or 5 plus more men, and they're still on the force. And just to give you guys a little background about our family and Sean, is we're from San Francisco. Sean was out one night in Vallejo and was murdered in Vallejo. Prior to him passing that evening, that night, he sent me and Ashley a text message at 11:49 saying, "Can you guys help me by signing the petition for George Floyd to get justice? Only takes a minute, you know, we all know Sean." So I responded, just did it, and Ashley sent him a heart.
And then just 40 minutes after, he was murdered.
And we got a phone call around 1:09 of someone hysterically crying and saying your brother was just murdered. You know, we've gotten phone calls and just scares in the past, not with murder, but just of, you know, what do you do when your brother is constantly being harassed by police? You know, they're always booked in or something like that. So me and Ashley thought that's what it meant, but something just felt so different. I believe that all our loved ones, we have a spiritual connection, our lifeline. And I can't explain the feeling I had. I felt very nauseated. It takes about 40 minutes to get to Vallejo from San Francisco. So this is when we had a state issued, or San Francisco issued a curfew at 8 p.m. So we weren't allowed, you know, technically allowed to leave. But, you know, that's my brother. I'm gonna go figure out what happened. So me and Ashley both got in the vehicle. We drove to Vallejo. By the time we get to Vallejo, it's already like 2 a.m. Sean's phone was still pinpointed at the location, which was 1050 Redwood Street.
So we have a group chat in which Sean's last text message was for the petition of George Floyd, and we also shared our locations with each other because we were that close. And so when we got to the crime scene, we were like, our brother's location is here. Where is he? We're trying to locate him. And they said, well, there's a lot of people that got arrested or this and that. I said, well, his phone's here. Where is he? They said, well, there's a lot of phones here. After we got the footage that was released, my brother was alone. So
therefore, they already lied. Me and Ashley didn't leave Vallejo that night till like 5 a.m. It was basically a wild goose chase. They sent us to the Vallejo PD. The Vallejo PD was closed. They all knew it was an officer involved shooting, so they're out on the streets. The hospital was on lockdown. We went to the hospital, tried to identify Sean. They said, no, that's not him. We have a guy that's bigger build. So me and Ashley
They were just
out
sending
there.
us back and forth to find time from the crime scene to the hospital and another hospital. We were on a wild goose hunt, and they knew what had happened at that point. That eventually we found out that there was already an officer there.
Apparently he was, getting checked in for his wounds or whatever happened.
And Sean already was surrendering on his knees with his hands up when an unmarked pickup truck arrived to the scene. The unmarked pickup truck hadn't even stopped when Officer Jarrett Ton, from the backseat of the pickup truck, lifted his AR-15 and shot through the windshield 5 times. One bullet struck my brother in the neck and out the head. Eventually we saw the footage that they started giving my brother CPR.
We all know that, anyone, you don't have to be a doctor to understand, if there's ever a wound, you apply pressure to that. So it just goes to show they're untrained.
They're incompetent. And once my brother was already lifeless and bleeding out, they cuffed him. My brother was already dead and they cuffed him.
Like, how afraid do you feel of a Black man or a Latino man to still cuff them while they're lifeless already? So
they kept my brother in handcuffs until the paramedics arrived.
Even the paramedics, you hear them in the video say, you need to take those off. Like, I can't take a pulse. But that whole night when we were out there, I told Ashley, let's just go home and regroup. We weren't notified by Vallejo PD till 38 hours later, and they never reached out. Our attorney, John Burrs, was the one who went to the police
press conference
on June 3rd.
And June 3rd was the day after my brother was murdered. I turned 20.
So, that's already hurtful enough to lose your brother, and then for her to turn 20 on that evening. So they called us, a detective, Kevin Rose, and said, can I speak to the Monterosa family? And I said, what is this regards? He's like, oh, I just need to ask some questions. I hung up. I called John. And I said, well, there's this guy trying to contact us. And he's like, well, you don't need to talk to them. The only reason we knew Sean was gone is because we called the coroner's office. And when Ashley gave a description and she said, you know what, can you actually give me his birthday? And my sister gave him his birthday, and they were like, yep, he's here. So that's how we found out. No one's ever reached out from Vallejo. What we have had so far is that the pressure we've applied. We had Krishna Abrams, the DA
Solano
of
County
Solano
DA.
County, to recuse herself.
We went to go protest at the Solano County DA's office for her to recuse. And 2 weeks after we protested, she finally did recuse. So now it's supposed to be Attorney General Javier Becerra to take the case. However, he's more like a puppet at this point.
They're all playing hot potato with Sean's case.
The windshield of the unmarked pickup truck in which Jarrett Ton shot at my brother through with an AR-15, that evidence has now been destroyed and tampered with. The 2 officers that tampered and destroyed the evidence are Michael Nicolini and Fabio Rodriguez. Michael Nicolini is the president of the Vallejo Police Union. So that just goes to show, we all know how powerful these police unions are and how much wiggle room they have to get away with these things, that AG Becerra is now investigating just the tampering with evidence, but it's unfair that the destruction of evidence is more important than my brother's being murdered by the hands of a police officer.
They gave the statement of saying that Sean was on his knees when his hands up. So that's already a universal sign of surrender. Sean knew that whatever he was doing, he was going to get booked in, as he must have thought. But then here comes this unmarked vehicle still driving and shoots out. It didn't even make a complete stop. It still drove towards him. What we do have as family demands now is that we found out that Jarrett Ton, which is the officer who murdered my brother, is back off paid leave, and he's at a desk job right now at Vallejo. We want him fired, prosecuted, and convicted. That is straight up cold blood murder. But also,
this is an officer who's had 3 previous
incidents
and complaints where he has shot at 3 Latino men before. Sean's the first murder, but this is an ongoing issue that he's been doing. And this was in Galt near Sacramento. So once they found out about those 3 shootings with those folks,
Here,
they sent him
transfer them.
they transferred over to Vallejo. And this is what happens all the time. When someone does a bunch of dirt in one city, they just send them over to the next quiet city. And Vallejo's been getting away with all these murders since 1997 because Vallejo is so small. But it had to be my brother being from San Francisco, being murdered out there just that night to shed so much light on the other families' cases. And it's just, I don't even know how to explain it. It's just, it's insane to me that no one's even knew how dangerous and how corrupt Vallejo is.
Vallejo's the highest per capita in California. You're more likely to, a third of the population is more likely to be murdered by Vallejo PD than regular just street violence, violence itself. So our family's demands are to fire and prosecute and convict Jared Ton, but also Michael Nicolini. He is an 18-year veteran and he should know better. That's obstruction of justice at the end of the day. They would never allow tampering with evidence for any other case. Why was it such a rush to take my brother's vehicle that was a key murder evidence, So it's more infuriating to us that they have that power to tamper. And it just goes to show that we need state legislators to implement a third party to investigate officers when there is officer involved shootings. But then again, the big reform is we want to defund, right? Once we defund, we need to disarm, because at the end of the day, they're more cowardly to murder our brothers and sisters, and we're sick of it. And that me and Ashley will do anything we can to make sure Sean is the last one in Vallejo, but also in California. Gavin Newsom has yet to speak out on the 3 Latino men who have been murdered on the hands of police. My brother is Sean Monterrosa, but also Eric Salgado in Oakland and Andres Guardado in Gardena, California. So there's a lot of silence. And aside from all of this, my brother was for Black liberation. He went out for the protesters for George Floyd. We already know that a younger generation of us were people thought Rodney King era would be the end. But here we are, 2020, George Floyd, and it's just sickening to us. And this is the time that it's Black and brown unity, because we need to fight a bigger gang, and it's the police. Because at the end of the day, they're more afraid of us being united and going against them than, they feel outnumbered. And I feel like we need to apply all the pressure we have right now and not stop and continue it till we get these actions implemented. We get these cops convicted and fired. But then again, if they ever do have any officer involved, problems, they shouldn't even be a cop in the first place.
Right.
So that's where we're at. We're hurt, but we're also feel empowered to spread awareness and make sure that my brother's name doesn't go in vain, just like Alyssa said. And, the families we're hurt, we're hurting. There's generations who've been hurting for years, and we got to do everything we can to make sure these cops are incarcerated, because that's really where they belong.
I want to just thank you both again. I don't think I've ever moderated a panel and had tears in my eyes. I think this is a first for, I also saw tears in the other panelists' eyes, but we are touched and moved by your story. Always know that those of us that are on this panel here are here to support you. You have an extended family within us. And we're also gonna fight for your brother. There's the Instagram page at Justice
for Sean.
And so people could follow that, as well as, we're going to be showing up with you here in California to make sure that we get justice for not only him, but like you said, Eric and Andres and any other person who has been killed at the hands of police. And I really want to applaud you for reminding us that at this moment, we need Black and brown unity. We need to be in solidarity with one another to fight the largest thing, which is police. And so thank you both. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for pouring your hearts out, for sharing your strategies and everything that you all done. I'm going to try to bring Tamika back. I know that Tamika had been on. Are you here still, Tamika?
I am here. Can you hear and see me?
Yes.
I just want to say really quickly, because I've been listening the whole time. I've been just at the computer watching. That one, I'm really proud of you, Constance, because I remember when we first met, you were like hardly able to articulate anything you were thinking because of the pain, one, and two, because you had never been in a situation like the one that you ended up in. And now you sound better than me. You know so much about the laws and everything, and all of you sound so good. Elisa, Victoria, and of course, Yulsan, who is our partner and friend in this struggle. But my heart is so broken, Ashley, to you and your sister, and listening to what the two of you are saying. It sounds so much like Breonna Taylor. Tamika Palmer, Breonna's mom, they did the same thing to her. This is not a one police precinct that may have bad practices situation. It's an actual tactic to send families on a wild goose chase where they can't find their loved ones. They sent Ms. Palmer back and forth to the hospital. They kept asking her whether or not there's anyone who would want to see Breonna dead, who would want to hurt her, knowing that they were the ones who actually killed her, and that she was inside the home on the floor, inside her home on the floor dead. They knew that, but they kept sending them back and forth to the hospital, where they would go to the hospital doesn't have her. They were looking all around, and the police knew all along where she was and exactly what happened. So again, this is not some random situation. It's actually a tactic that they use. And you guys are so strong. And I know that because of how you sound and the power in your voices, that you're going to ensure that there's justice for your brother. And we're here to support you. And thank you, Carmen, for introducing us to this beautiful family.
Thank you so much, Tamika. Thank you, everybody. Please share your information. Those of you that are watching, we're pinning some of the information on petitions and how to follow folks. Tamika, we love you. I know you all are going back to Kentucky. Please be safe. And all of you, thank you so much to Yosan, Ashley, Michelle, Victoria, Elisa, Constance. Thank you so much. And also you, Bria. Thank you for sharing your story, for sharing your passion with all of us. And we are truly honored, and we are one family. I'm now going to be introducing our next segment. And also, it's a privilege for me to introduce the next moderator, who is Jasmine Delafosse. She is our senior regional organizer at the Gathering for Justice. She is also a subject of a documentary on HBO that has come out called Stockton on My Mind. If those of you who watched it yesterday, please, give her a shout out. I know that it was very special to see her out there advocating for young people who were impacted by incarceration. It's about Stockton's mayor, Michael Tubbs, who she worked closely with for years. I will let Jasmine introduce her guest tonight, and I will see you all at the end of the program. Take it away, Jasmine. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. And greetings, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Jasmine Delafosse. I'm the senior regional organizer with the Gathering for Justice. But first, let me just take a moment to just really, honor and pay respects to the panel before us. So beautiful and so wonderfully moved and super humbled to hear your stories and the call to action and the responsibility we have for one another. I just want to thank you again for hearing your stories. I have the greatest privilege to lead Justice League California here. And I have the opportunity to support a young man who now I consider a brother, who we'll be talking about today, Jacob Servin. On December 2nd, December 2nd of 2019, Jacob Servin, also known as Jakey, a 29-year-old Chicano from Stockton, California, was excessively and brutally beaten by the San Joaquin County Sheriff's correctional staff working in the jail while in custody. On December 4th of 2019, Jacob's case had gained national attention for many of the sites where community activists like Sean King and many other influencers and professional athletes and millions across this country witnessed the injustice happen to Jacob Servin. Today, we have Jacob Servin's attorney who will be joining us today to share us a little bit about an update about what's going on with Jacob's case. Sanjay Smith is a long-standing committed attorney who's fighting for the people around constitutional rights who've been violated. He started his legal career as a deputy public defender in 2007, litigating criminal cases ranging from misdemeanors to serious felonies. In 2007, he litigated criminal cases in 2010, he opened his own practice where he concentrates largely on federal civil rights policies, misconduct litigation. The majority of his cases involve claims arising from excessive force, in-depth custodies, in-custody serious injuries, false arrests, and unlawful search and seizure and prosecution. You know, Sanjay, I'm so grateful that you're here to share a little bit about Jacob's story and what's been happening. I wanted to just hear from you. I know your office is investigating this incident and related issues. How has San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office been transparent with Jacob's case?
Well, first of all, let me just say that I'm very appreciative for the opportunity. Thank you for the opportunity to share this platform with such an amazing group of individuals and activists and speakers. And it's a real honor and it's a real privilege to be able to speak about Mr. Servin's case specifically, and more broadly to speak about some of the issues that are common threads in all these kinds of cases. And this has been a very compelling and interesting program so far. So thank you very much. It's a real honor to be able to share a platform with everyone. So to answer your question, the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office has been extremely opaque regarding my office's independent investigation of this incident. The Sheriff's Office has refused to disclose any information regarding what led my client to suffer these grievous injuries, including refusing to identify the correctional officers and other sheriff's office employees that were involved in the incident, refusing to share any reports or other information about the incident, refusing to provide any information about whether there was any discipline as a result of the incident, and in general, basically asserting a long list of just blanket boilerplate objections, because my office has served 2 requests under the California Public Records Act for information in addition to just a specific request, since Mr. Servin is our client and he has standing and a right to request certain information. And so we plan to vindicate both Mr. Servin's right to obtain this information in addition to the community's right, because the community of San Joaquin and the people of Stockton and the surrounding areas have a right to know who these officers were and what the facts were, what their claims are, which, based on Sheriff Pat Withrow's press conference, sound to be very stilted in favor of the correctional officer's account. And so we plan to bring an enforcement action in state court under the CPRA. And fortunately, there's been some positive developments in California law regarding transparency. California has one of the most protective privacy laws in the entire country regarding police officer personnel records, because the police officer lobby has been very effective in Sacramento, and they have a very robust privacy law. But fortunately, in 2018, the California legislature passed Senate Bill 1421, which was signed into law and went into effect on January 1st, 2019. And so that Senate bill amended Penal Code Section 832.7B1, and there's a list of certain records that used to be highly confidential under California law, which now are no longer confidential. And one of those categories of records, which applies here, would be uses of force resulting in death or serious bodily injury, or actually the statute says great bodily injury. And so Mr. Servin clearly suffered great bodily injury within all reasonable definitions of the law. And so we plan to invoke that law. Now, unfortunately, the reform was a good step, but it was not drastic. It wasn't quite as drastic as the reform that I understand occurred in New York, which I don't know all the intricacies, but my understanding is that there was a repeal of, I believe it's Rule 50A, and I might be wrong on the number on that, but I believe that there's a lot of media outlets in New York City and elsewhere that are now publishing complaints and other disciplinary history, which used to be confidential. So this is a good step. Unfortunately, under 832.7B1 and some of the subsections, there are some exceptions. And so we expect that this will be aggressively litigated, but we plan to pursue that. And that's probably the most pressing issue right now is the CPRA action. And other than that, I mean, there's other issues in terms of, you know, we're going to pursue a federal civil rights enforcement action, as you know. So I know you had some other questions, but that answers your first question. But you know, the county, just to sum it up, they've been alarmingly opaque. But fortunately, you know, we have the ability to hold them accountable in this initial action. And then when we pursue the federal civil rights enforcement action, which I'll talk about a little later, the sunshine is going to be shined even brighter. We're going to be able to shine an even brighter light on the records and the history in the San Joaquin County Jail, because we'll have discovery rights, and the discovery rights under federal law are much broader, and they don't recognize a lot of these California state privileges and privacy objections that you typically get until you have federal litigation that's underway.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, as someone who's from San Joaquin County and who lives here, you know, we've known for a very long time, and we've seen decades and history and cycles of San Joaquin County who's been reluctant in sharing information, and we know that there have been many incidences that we've seen the county, you know, lack transparency and accountability. My next question to you is a two-part question. What does justice look like for Jacob and his family, and what kind of reform do you hope to achieve with this case? And what are your thoughts around that?
Well, you know, from my perspective, we have a felony assault under color of law. That's what occurred. And there is what's called an OICI, Officer Involved Critical Incident Investigation, that's underway, and that's being conducted by a multi-agency task force in San Joaquin County that includes the DA's office, some members of the sheriff's office, who actually employ the correctional officers that inflicted these grievous injuries, in addition to, I believe, some members of the Stockton Police Department and possibly one or two other agencies. But in any event, that's going on. And then there's also an internal affairs investigation that I imagine has concluded now, since this incident happened way back in the beginning of December. But to be completely candid, we're not confident that justice is going to be served by either of those investigations or decisions. Now, there may still be a criminal prosecution. The DA hasn't made a charging decision on that yet, but what justice looks like to us is a full vindication of Mr. Servin's constitutional rights under the 4th Amendment and the 14th Amendment. Mr. Servin was subjected, as I indicated, to an assault under color of law, which is why we're going to file an action in federal court under 42 U.S. Code Section 1983 to vindicate Mr. Servin's rights under the U.S. Constitution. In addition to the California Constitution, he has a right under Article 1, Section 13, to be free from an unreasonable seizure or search. And excessive force is categorized constitutionally as an unreasonable seizure. He also has a right under California Civil Code Section 52.1, which is the Bain Act, and that protects us from constitutional violations under state law, either violations of our state constitution or our other federally protected rights. And one of the rights that's protected under California law is under Civil Code 43, which is the right to basically be protected against a bodily assault like what happened here. And so there's a number of grounds. There will be federal claims and also supplemental state law claims in the federal action. And we plan to hold the county, in addition to obviously the correctional officers accountable. And full justice to us would be a finding by a jury that these officers transgressed the U.S. and state constitution, violated his rights. And we plan to pursue punitive damages as well in our federal civil rights enforcement action. And that's one of the great things about Section 1983, is because it allows us to litigate these issues and obtain a trial in front of jurors that will hear this evidence, and irrespective of what happens in the county with respect to the OICI investigation, irrespective of whether these officers are disciplined, irrespective of whether the DA's office files criminal charges, they're going to have to answer to what they did to Mr. Servin in federal court. And we'll have robust discovery rights, and we plan on shining a very bright light on San Joaquin, in particular, the sheriff's department and how that jail is being run, because without revealing any information that is subject to the work product privilege in terms of what my office is doing in the way of investigation, I can say today that this is not an isolated incident. There are other individuals that have been subjected to similar needless, cruel, and callous beatings in the San Joaquin County Jail. We plan to conduct very vigorous and robust discovery. And at this point, it seems that there may be, a pattern of practice. And so we hope, in addition to getting full and complete justice for Mr. Servin, for all of the harms and losses that he suffered, we also hope to obtain some reforms in San Joaquin County in terms of the oversight, the policies and practices. And Mr. Withrow, Sheriff Pat Withrow of San Joaquin County, his press conference very shortly after this incident is Exhibit A, that the sheriff's office there appears to be, at this point, deliberately indifferent to violations of constitutional rights that are occurring in their jail. Because before the OICI investigation had even practically started, and before the internal investigation had been completed, Sheriff Withrow was already out giving press conferences, completely adopting the narrative that he was given by his correctional officers. And his press conference was very short, obviously because this incident precipitated a lot of community outrage. And so he had to, I guess, as a public official, try to get out in front of this. And so he basically ratified his officer's conduct in that initial press conference. And that's troubling before any investigation is even done. And we expect that our discovery may uncover similar ratification of such misconduct. But we also hope to achieve a very important reform, which would be a requirement under San Joaquin County Sheriff's policy that any use of force in the jail be recorded either on the jail's surveillance system or a body-worn camera or some other device, so that we're not left with a he said, or a he said, she said, or God forbid, a he said, he's dead if they kill someone when there's no video. We want any use of force to be on video. And we hope that through this lawsuit that we can push for that kind of reform. And we want to push for more accountability and oversight when there is a use of force like this, so that we don't have the same agency that inflicted grievous injuries investigating their own officers. There should be an independent agency that individuals can be comfortable complaining to, and who will conduct a very independent and robust investigation of claims of officer misconduct, whether it's use of force or other misconduct. And so those are some of the reforms that we would like to see come out of this lawsuit and this federal civil rights enforcement action that we're going to be pursuing. And I'm sure that as discovery progresses and as we learn more about the full nature and extent of Mr. Servin's harms and losses, I'm sure that we're going to have a better idea also of what full justice is going to look like, because we will accept nothing short of full justice for Mr. Servant, and that's what we expect to, that's what we plan to pursue in the federal civil rights action, and which will be preceded, of course, by the CPRA action.
Yes, and thank you. And for those who are just tuning in, we are talking about Jacob Servin, who was excessively and beatedly beaten in the San Joaquin County jail by several correctional staff officers in the county jail. And so there you have a picture on your screen of Jacob Servin, who you can see was, beatedly beaten by the sheriffs. And on the bottom, you see Jacob, who continues to fight and advocate. He's currently, and unfortunately couldn't make it today, but wanted to make sure that you all had a picture of him. And as we begin to close, Sanjay, can you just tell us a little bit about how Jacob is doing? How has this impacted him? And if there is anything else you think the audience should know about Jacob's story, and why this has just been an important story to share.
Well, yeah, thank you. So, Mr. Servin and I, we're in touch very frequently, and I try to check in with him, and he's a very resilient individual. Let's be honest though, this was a very traumatic incident, and this is a life-changing experience, being subjected to such callous, needless, and brutal force at the hand of state-employed individuals that are being paid by government tax dollars. And this happened to Mr. Servin. I think before these kinds of things happen to people, they wonder, God, could this happen to me? And then it happens. And to be honest with you, he's a very resilient individual, and he is doing everything he can, to bounce back. But we don't know yet the full nature and extent of Mr. Servin's harms and losses. And he's doing what he needs to do to try to get better and to try to get back to his normal life. And of course, he wishes just, this never would have happened. But we hope to obtain nothing short of full justice for Mr. Servin. And, there's a Latin phrase, nemo est supra legem, which means nobody is above the law. And nowhere is that truer than in federal court when we have the opportunity to pursue a federal civil rights enforcement action, against the individuals that violated Mr. Servin's rights. And he did want to be here today. He wasn't able to, but he's a very compelling individual. He has a very compelling story, and he's doing everything he can to get his life on track and to get his life back together. And like I said before, this is a life-changing experience, but he's only stronger for it. And he's a very, very powerful voice in this movement. And it's a privilege again to be a part of this program and to be a part on a larger scale of this movement at this time, because this is really a very compelling and exciting movement that we have. And this is the civil rights movement of our time. And we have a lot of momentum, and I'm very honored by all the work that all the other speakers are doing, and we just have to keep the momentum up.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Sanjay, for joining us today and sharing Jacob's story. We appreciate you. And for those who want to learn more about Jacob, you can follow his Facebook and Instagram page at Justice for Jakey, Jaykie, and or follow Jakey on Instagram at Jaykie. Well, we thank you again for your time. And I'm going to pass this over to my sister, Bria Baker, who will take us into the next segment to share us a little bit more about Akbar Rogers. And so thank you again, Sanjay, and thanks for everyone for having us today.
Hey, thank you, Jasmine. Appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. Yes, I'm really excited to introduce the next moderator, and she will introduce the next panelist, But before I get into that, I just want to introduce what this segment is going to be about. So in December of 2019, a man named Akbar Rogers in Long Island, New York, right outside of the boroughs, was brutally beaten by several police officers from Freeport, Long Island. And so I found out on the day after this happened, on December 4th, and immediately I connected to my Justice League family and was like, so what are we doing? How can we pull up? And obviously we come together like Voltron, and we were really excited to make something happen. But Karis, one of the Justice League members, said, we got to make sure that we include Nia in this. She's on the ground, she's dope, this has to happen. And so I'm like, yes. And so now, after like 6-7 months later, she's now a new member of Justice League and has been really holding and leading the coalition of activists who are supporting Akbar and his legal team. So I'm gonna pass it off to Nia, who's gonna moderate this next segment.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here. Hello, Ramsey. Hello, Akbar. I'm so happy to see you, here with us tonight.
It's a privilege.
Yes, given the circumstances, it really is a privilege that, we're here and we can talk about this. So my first question is actually for Akbar. The Long Island Progressive Coalition, Justice League NYC, and countless community members have been working and fighting with you for justice since December. But for those of us who, may be new to hearing about your case, can you please tell us a bit about your experience, about what happened and the police brutality?
Yeah. Well, I thank everybody for coming to listen to the show tonight. And what happened that night, by the grace of God, I'm here to tell you guys, I could have ended up like George Floyd. I was beaten, I was tased, I was suffocated. I thought I was going to die, but when I told the officers that I couldn't breathe, that it was for real. So my wind and everything in my lungs, they were just suffocating me, pushing me down, just taunting me, beating me up, not even trying to hear nothing I had to say. So that I thought about my kids, I thought about my grandkids, I thought about my mother, more or less. I thought who would take care of them if I was to be deceased. And it was just a whole bunch of different things going through my mind at the time. It's just an ordeal that you would never want to picture yourself or any human being or any other person through. And amazingly, when I told the officers I couldn't breathe, their response was, fuck you. They just, they continued to suffocate me, the life out of me. And with all I said, because I live, I feel as God has a plan for me to be the voice of the community, to stand up against racism, stand up against injustice and justice and injustice, and to be a part of the solution. We have to work together. We have to stick together. We have to root out the evil. The police is here to serve us and protect us all. It isn't the badge isn't the badge close attached to the heart of the officers. If we can't trust the police, how can we live in an orderly society? What's good are what good are laws if the ones that swore to uphold them instead of ignore them and then instead break them with no accountability? There must be accountability for all of us, badge or no badge. You have to be accountable for everything you do. And my point when I say this is because when you sit here and look at that tape, it's just disgusting, because I have kids and I have a lot of family and they see the tragedy and they're appalled by it. And then what the DA did, they can't understand that how you don't charge these officers accordingly with the assault, because that's what I got assault. In all my years, I grew up in Freeport. Everybody know me as a cordial guy. I played basketball. And at the end of the day, they just treated me like a misfit, like I was a criminal, like a hardcore criminal. Like I gave the lady at Newsweek, I said, if you take a guy that shoot up a school and go in there, he comes out unscathed with a straight jacket, nothing, they give him a cheeseburger, let him sit by the police car unscathed. He don't have nothing, not a blemish on his body. But here it is, I'm on a traffic infraction and another violation. They try to kill me out there. Like I just did some heinous crime. So it's just, I still I hate to sit here and bring the tragedy up, but but it has to be some justice because these guys can't get away. Because what it does, it constantly in our community, like nobody trusts these people out here. Even the people I see here and see me from day to day, they shake their head like, you know what? They disgusted with the same tape. So it's like the community don't trust these Freeport police officers. And the mayor and the DA, I don't know what type of a scenario they see that was like justifiable force, but I'm still at a loss of words.
No, thank you for sharing that, because I feel, you know, when this was brought to my attention, the attention of the community at large, it was shocking, mostly because we know that this is a practice. This is not unusual, right? And so it's not just that you were brutalized, but that you were brutalized by 8 police officers, including officers that are the sons of the mayor of Freeport. Absolutely. And how there has been no accountability for that, and that in the mindset of the district attorney, that use of force was appropriate. Wow. Which is, I mean, unbelievably unacceptable. Randy, I wanted to ask you, why was it so important for you to work with Akbar on this case?
There are really 3 reasons why. First of all, it was the opportunity to get justice for Akbar. Tens of thousands of people who watched that video. There is only one conclusion. Akbar Rogers was and is and always has been innocent. He did nothing. So to clear his name was important to me. Then there is my responsibility as part of the criminal justice system. And my responsibility as a defense attorney is to make sure that no innocent person is ever convicted wrongfully. Finally, it's being here. It is recognizing the greater responsibility that I have as a member of this society to stand up, to use my voice. It wasn't simply about Akbar. And I remember being challenged by Akbar and by the Long Island Progressive Coalition. Randy, what are you going to do? We're confident you're going to get those charges dismissed. Then what? And I thought about that, and I recognized immediately that the then what was as important, if not more important, because the then what was to address systemic racism, to go up against the system, to go up against the police department, the mayor, the county, the state, anyone, anything. Nothing would stand in our way to ensure there's never another Akbar Rogers. There's never another George Floyd, because any of your viewers, any of us, it could be our son, it could be our father, it could be our uncle, it could be our best friend. And it was my responsibility, and it is my responsibility, to ensure justice for everyone. And the only way to ensure justice, the only way to ensure trust, is to demand accountability. It is to demand that there's not only justice for Akbar Rogers, but that those who are responsible are brought to justice, that these police officers are held accountable, they are held criminally responsible. That is the only way that justice truly will be served.
Thank you. And you bring up an incredibly important subject about, this is a much larger discussion about systemic, I won't even call them systemic faults, because they are operating in the way in which they were designed. But that here in Long Island and all throughout the country, as a result of colonialism and anti-Blackness, we have George Floyd's and Breonna Taylor's and Tony McDade's all over this country every day. Someone right now, as we're having this discussion, is being brutalized by the police. And so this is why we're here to, you know, deconstruct those power structures for justice. Akbar, so earlier this month, we saw Nassau County District Attorney Madeline Singer. She dropped the charges against you, these bizarre charges that should have never been placed on you. And many people saw this as a win. And I won't say it wasn't a win, but I want to know from your perspective, how do we remind people that this fight isn't over, that there's more to be done?
Well, I'm happy the charges rightfully dropped and dismissed, but right now it's no longer about me. Until those police officers rightly, you know, prosecuted and hold accountable for their behavior, there's nothing in the, I mean, all right, dropping the charges means nothing for the community. It does nothing to address the larger issue of systematic racism and law enforcement. It does nothing to make sure the next Black man who was beaten and tased and suffocated isn't your son or your husband. It does nothing to end the conversation. Black parents are obligated these days to have their son, to talk with their sons about police officers. It does nothing to make our community safer or more secure. It does nothing to help us as a community feel good about where we live. It does nothing to make us feel secure that the police are our partners in our community. I'll applaud Senator Gilbrand's call for investigation to these officers since the district attorney refused to prosecute these police officers and hold them criminally accountable. I applaud Newsday's editorial board call for the governor to refer this matter to the Attorney General for an investigation into these police officers since the district attorney refused to prosecute them and hold them criminally accountable. This is no longer about me, it's all about us now and all the Black lives that matter.
Absolutely. And, you know, as we're speaking about accountability, right, that we, Justice League, Long Island Progressive Coalition, community members from all across the island, you know, holding press conferences and rallies for you, for other victims of police brutality, of, you know, all gender identities. And this concept about building people power to hold people accountable and to get justice, rightful justice, right? So most recently, Randy, we saw Senator Gillibrand and some others have called for an independent investigation. This obviously has been something that we have been calling for since December, since we held our first press conference on it. How do you feel, or how does that make you feel about the opportunity for justice now?
Nothing could please me more, and nothing could make me more thankful. The efforts of all of the activists, all of the community leaders, the Justice League, the Long Island Progressive Coalition, our religious leaders, our community leaders. Look at what it has all come to. What started out as a cell phone video recording, some protesting outside of the courthouse when we had a court appearance, suddenly we have tens of thousands of people watching the video, watching us right now, 10,000 people plus signing a petition. And I am so proud to say that today I learned that Governor Cuomo has opened an investigation. The Attorney General has opened an investigation. Just read Newsday today, The Point, Randy Marshall's column. Both Governor Cuomo and Attorney General James have called for an investigation. And it is all because of your efforts, Nia. It is all because of your viewers' efforts that suddenly we have the power of the United States Senate. We have Senator Gillibrand, Senator Schumer. We now have Governor Cuomo. We have Attorney General James. We are one step closer to a criminal referral. We are one step closer to justice. The governor, the Attorney General, they're calling for the community to heal. They're calling for a new bond between the police and the community. They're calling for respect and trust. Well, the only way to get there is by action. not by words. And the only action here, the only action that makes any sense is to hold these police officers criminally responsible, criminally accountable. If you want to wrongfully accuse Akbar Rogers, let's rightfully accuse these police officers. So to your question and to your point, it is so fulfilling for me, not just as an attorney, but as a human being, to sit here before all of you and tell you it's working. They are listening. Let's keep it going.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I want to say, by no means was this a single, a one-woman fight. This was people power across the island, across the state. We have been, myself, getting calls from people in different states who are following this case and are supporting in the ways that they can. And so I think, before we close this out, we need to really hone in on what people power is. And that is making those calls, writing those letters, being in the streets, being in people's faces, telling them this is not okay. And we know this is not okay. And this is not okay. So you need to make it right, or we're going to be out here every day until you make it right. So before, we close for that, I do want to say the Long Island Progressive Coalition is holding an action hour on Friday, this Friday, July 31st from 1 to 2. We will be doing live calls to both the governor and Attorney General Tish James's office to demand an independent investigation of the Freeport Department. And also, across the board, getting accountability about all the kinds of systemic issues that are happening, particularly in Freeport. And so I'm sure someone from the Gathering of Justice is sharing that with the participants. A toolkit will also be shared in case you can't make it to the action hour, but you still want to make calls and tweets and what have you at these electeds to demand that we have this type of justice for Akbar. So I appreciate both of you for your time. And don't worry, because we're going to be right back out in these streets again next week, because this is what we do. Thank you so much. Now, I'd like to introduce the next moderator. This person is a sister of mine in this movement. She is Bronx to the bone. She is a Grammy-nominated artist and activist, and I am so honored to know her. So I'd like to welcome Karis LeVay.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Mia. Thank you for that. Hello, Akbar. It's really good to see you, as always. And thank you for sharing your story. So my name is Karis. I'm a member of Justice League. And this segment, we're wrapping up this segment with what do we do next? And we know that we have folks that follow us and this movement is up and going and people want to know what is it that we do next? How do we keep pressure? And like Nia mentioned, how do we continue this people power? So this segment on the panel, I have with me Dr. Melina Abdullah of Black Lives Matter LA. I have New York State Assembly member Michael Blake, who represents the 79th District in the Bronx. Bronx is here. We have Anthony DiMartino from Californians for Justice and Safety. And we have London Arnold Justice Committee from Justice Committee. Welcome. This panel is made up of activists, policy experts we're going to talk about how much policy is important in this movement and how we can use policy and legislation to undo the systemic issues that we face in policing. And so we did hear earlier today, for those who've been watching all evening with us, we heard earlier from family members of those who were murdered by police, talk a little bit about some of the things that we've won in New York State, like the repeal of 50A, the Police Stat Act. And London, if you can just give us a quick overview of those policies, and how it's connected to this overall liberation and undoing some of these systemic barriers?
Yeah, sure. So the Police Stat Act gives us data on police killings and low-level police enforcement across the state and allows us to know more intimate information about police killings and those enforcements. And so when 50A was repealed, it allowed us to tear down that wall of secrecy that the NYPD and other New York police departments use in using ways to protect abusive police officers and keep things under wraps as far as misconduct reports go. And so the special prosecutor bill is a bill that would allow all cases, regardless of if the victim was allegedly armed, to be tried by a special prosecutor. And it's something that the families who you may have heard from earlier have been demanding for years. So all three of these were very, very big victories. And right now what's happening in New York City and New York State is that families and those of us who have been working on these bills are now having to defend them because they're now currently under attack by New York City police unions. And so they're trying to roll back the repeal of 50A, which would allow or not allow us to be able to get that misconduct data. And we recognize that this is common for police unions to do because we know that there's a history of police secrecy and shielding abusive officers. But so we're now in this fight where we're trying to maintain the repeal of 50A and our wins with these other two bills.
Thank you. Thank you for that, just that overview. We have folks on, this is a coast to coast. As we know, Justice League is a national organization. We have Justice League NYC and Justice League California. We are coast to coast here, and California has some really big legislative things on the table right now. I want to bring to attention a bill that is being proposed that would strip convicted officers of their badges in California. California is one of 5 states that currently do not have the authority to take away officers' badge for crimes and serious misconduct. So, Dr. Abdullah or Anthony, could you speak a little bit to this bill that's being proposed and why it's important?
Sure. Anthony, you want me to go first or? Yeah, okay. So one of the bills that we're working on is a police decertification bill, which does exactly what you're saying. So we know that many times when police kill our people, it's not their first murder. And so we have a decertification bill that's moving, that's being sponsored by State Senator Steve Bradford, and that's being offered in the name of Kenneth Ross Jr. And we hope that everyone pulls up the video of Kenneth Ross Jr. that remembers the name Kenneth Ross Jr. One of the challenges that we have in California is that so many people are killed by police, especially in Los Angeles County, that sometimes the names and stories get lost. Kenneth Ross Jr. was murdered by an officer named Michael Robbins at a park in Gardena, California, which is right outside of Oakland. This was Michael Robbins' 4th shooting. Michael Robbins had been an officer in Orange, the city of Orange, California, and then moved, which is what many officers do. And many people are familiar, for instance, with what happened with the officer who murdered Tamir Rice, that he was able to jump from Cleveland to another locale, right? Because they're not decertified. If they are not prosecuted, right, then it really opens it up. And in Los Angeles County, 610 people have been killed by police and none of them have been prosecuted, right? So even when they're fired, they're able to jump to another locale. This decertification bill, which is named in honor of Kenneth Ross Jr., who was killed again by Michael Robbins in his 4th shooting. Kenneth Ross was a wonderful young man, an active father, was a support to his mother. He was simply walking down the street in broad daylight at like 1:30 in the afternoon. And Officer Michael Robbins, Sergeant Michael Robbins, got a call about supposedly gunshots in the area, trains his sights on Kenneth Ross, and says to himself, this is gonna be a good one, and then murders him like he was playing a video game, right? So I want everybody to see it for themselves, but also to say the name Kenneth Ross Jr. and be familiar with that story. So one of the pieces of legislation we're working on says that we shouldn't have to wait for problematic DAs who are in bed with police on every other case to prosecute officers that they're never going to prosecute, to remove them from the streets. We can decertify them without relying on DAs to do that.
Thank you. Anthony, did you want to add anything around that, around this? Go ahead.
Yeah, just really quick. I mean, Dr. Abdullah, hit it perfectly on this. I think this speaks to what's going on across the country, but also California has been moving in a positive direction over the last several years, right? And I think in an earlier segment, SB 1421 was mentioned. There's going to be more legislation around opening up officer records this year. There's over 12 bills I've counted that have been introduced that are looking at officer records, decertification, use of force, how they handle themselves at protests. And so, systematically, California is really looking at these issues, but there's so much more work to be done. But really applaud Dr. Abdullah and all those others that are working on these issues. I was a staffer just last year, and so coming on the outside now and getting to be in the fight with all the nonprofits and CBOs has been an honor. So really appreciate being here, and just recognize that there's a lot of work to be done, but there's some really good bills moving this year that we have a chance to sign into law by the end of this year.
Thank you. Dr. Abdullah brought in DAs and the role that DAs play. Assemblyman Michael Blake, we thank you for all your efforts and everything that you've done in the state assembly trying to get legislation passed. We know we've got the chokehold ban. We have this at the state level, we have bans on chokehold, even though the NYPD already has a ban on chokeholds, but that did not prevent the murder of Eric Garner, as we know. What do you say about recently we have DAs saying how we had the chief of police come out and DAs are saying, it's really up to them if they enforce this. How does that play a role in, at the legislature, folks are doing what they need to do, but if we don't have DAs that are going to enforce and charge officers, what does that say about the entire system and how we decertify and defund not just police, but also going after DAs who will not prosecute these cases?
My sister, always good to see you. First of all, you can call me Michael. I know we all get caught in titles out here, but yes, it's all good. And I feel like I got that California heat. It's like 95 degrees out here right now. The oppressor will never give up anything. And when we think about what we are watching and witnessing right now, and I am going to directly answer your question, but I got to show love to the California team that is here, because I just want you to know we watch what you all do regularly, and my conversations with Mike De La Rocha and so many others, and Lindy and everybody that's out there and people on the ground, it impacted and drove how we thought about a lot of our policies here. Right? So continue to help lead so that we can also lead as well. So when we think about the pushback, for context, when you have DAs communicating, I don't know if we're going to do that. When you have cops and unions that were moving forward and presenting in a court case, and I think August 18th is when they're going to have to move forward on the next steps of, no, we shouldn't allow 50A to happen, right? Which I know we're going to talk about momentarily. Think about the true lack of humanity that exists, that you have law enforcement actually communicating I don't know about that chokehold ban. I don't know, you know, because things might have jumped off and there may be other things that were going on that you didn't see. I'm sick and tired of people always telling me about, well, what happened before the camera. I don't give a damn what happened before the camera. I know what I saw, right? Like, just stop giving me this external excuse of other things supposedly happened that didn't happen, right? As you know, even last night, we had it here in New York. We were being told, if anyone didn't see, and I need to find a video that was mentioned about what happened out in California, but even last night here in New York, you saw cops roll up in an unmarked vehicle, grab someone, toss them in the car, and then immediately it was, well, there were things this person did beforehand that you all didn't know about. And so as it relates to the chokehold ban, you know, we had to do it because there was always this wiggle room they were trying to give themselves around regulations. And you know, well, you never know, there might have been something more. So we had to make it statutory. But the reason why we have to keep going and why elections matter and personnel matter and why we have to keep being attentive on the judicial elements of it as well is if we don't write the laws correctly and intentionally to prepare for the games that are coming, we'll then open ourselves up for more problems.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Blake, Michael, you know, we do look to California a lot here in New York. You know, it's the coast. The coast seem to be, you know, they paint us as being progressive, but Michael and I know that we have a lot of work to do still here in New York. There is a current bill that provides that any officers that are terminated for misconduct or if they resign during an investigation, that they would lose their retirement benefits. And so I know that that's on the floor now. Why is that important?
Why should anyone be able to keep their benefits if they're killing people? Right? If they're not doing their job. And I understand, I've heard the argument and the rationale of, well, what about the rest of the family that could be impacted by that? And hear me, I actually do receive the point. I can acknowledge the point. But if you did your job honorably, we wouldn't be having the conversation. Right? Like, so, you know, I was saying to someone, I know Constance was on earlier. Constance, I actually did a press call earlier today. And I said, when you have officers that are making more money after they killed somebody, right, then it's hard for me to really be sympathetic about that. You know, when you're being placed on desk duty, you know, and it's hard to have trust without transparency. And so I think, why are we putting these bills on the floor? Because it will create a level of accountability and, quite frankly, pressure. Because if you know, we're not talking about you losing some vacation days. We're talking about you losing your benefits. You losing your pension. Oh, okay. Now we're having a real conversation. Now we have an extended conversation has to be necessary. And to that point, and I mentioned it a few moments ago, but I think it's important to tie this together. This is why the fight around 50A is so important to that bill that you also just referenced around the loss of benefits and pension, et cetera, because you should not have a job in the first place if you were acting a fool, right? And if you repeatedly were doing things that should lead to you not having a job, that would make it even easier to make the argument of why we would be able to take things away. And so that's why I think it's important that we understand the continuity of justice. You know, it's not just one piece and one legislation. They're all intertwined.
Absolutely. You know, Carmen and Bria, they started off the entire town hall going over the history of policing in our country, which is so important to know that policing started from slave catching and protecting property of slave owners and such. And so, you know, activists, politicians, elected officials were tasked with trying to write policies and legislation that undo those pillars that are working the way that it's actually designed. And so this question is for everyone, because we really want to debunk some of the negative things that are being said about defund, what that word means, defund, and what it is that we're asking for when we want reinvestment into our communities. So what is next? For our viewers that are watching, if you're an organizer, or you're in your community and or you're thinking about policies that you want to push your elected officials to write and write correctly, as you said, Michael, how do we ensure that we get these laws and policies that undo the systemic oppression that oppresses Black and Brown people? So what are our next steps? What is it that our people can do? Michael, you mentioned voting. Of course, that is a tool. But what are the next steps for those of us who are organizing and doing this work? How do we keep the pressure? How do we connect policy to our marches, our sittings, and our calls, and et cetera?
Can I respond to that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think that there is a lot of rush to move from protest to politics. And I want to be real clear that no people have ever voted themselves into freedom. And so as we talk about what it is we need, as we continue to say, as my shirt says, defund the police, we are not talking about reforming the police. We're talking about defunding it, right? You mentioned the history. It's important to remember that as ridiculous as it would sound to say, let's reform chattel slavery, that's as ridiculous as it is to say, let's tinker around the edges and reform a system of policing that is a vestige of chattel slavery, right? It is the evolution of slave catching. That's what policing is, right? And so what's next? What's next is remembering that any time that we've won transformative and meaningful change, it's been because people have remained in the streets. People have made it more in the interests of those who hold traditional power to do what we say than to not do what we say, right? There is always and if you don't, there has to be an outside threat. There has to be, if you don't understand what we mean when we say defund the police. And I'm a little salty right now because the mayor of this city has just stood in front of, printed the words that we've been saying, reimagine public safety, right? Which means imagine, understand that public safety for Black people has never come by having police in our neighborhoods. That is the anti-public safety, right? Nobody Black on this earth, and correct me if I'm wrong, feels, and I know y'all not gonna correct me because I know I'm not wrong, right? Nobody Black feels safer when a cop car pulls up behind you, not even those who hold political power, right? Nobody thinks, woo, I'm glad there's a police car behind me, right? And so it's really important that we think about what it means to reimagine public safety as moving away from policing and investing in those things that our community actually needs, right? So we have a mayor of this city who is a liberal white supremacist. His name is Eric Garcetti. I'm just gonna put him on blast, who stood behind the words, our words, reimagine public safety, and announced the chartering of a new and permanent bureau in LAPD as the answer to reimagining public safety. They think that somehow if you put the word community in front of policing, that makes it not problematic. We ain't stupid, right? And so it's really important that we stay in the streets, because if we're not consistent and constant in our action, if we don't constantly move towards increased escalation, right? You'll have fools like Eric Garcetti who think they can appropriate our language, flank themselves with skin folk who ain't kinfolk, and usher in things like spending more money on police, like making defund the police somehow magically mean fund the police, right? So what's next is stay in the damn streets. Stay in the damn streets. Make it so Eric Garcetti wants to be president. No, you got a Black people problem. You will not win any higher office as long as you do that, right? The Black folks who think that they can stand there and misrepresent what it means to be Black and what Black people need, right, will also face political consequences. And we have to constantly raise our voices. It can't just be Black Lives Matter saying what we mean when we say Black Lives Matter. It can't just be, we can't let those with political power and corporations say Black Lives Matter and not prove Black Lives Matter. They gotta make Black Lives Matter. So we want folks to put their money where their mouth is, amplify what it is we're saying, and keep their bodies in the streets and plug in with an organization. So, you know, we want you to plug in with Black Lives Matter, but if you wanna plug in with other groups in New York, you know, of course, you know, we got Justice League, we got all kinds of stuff moving. Plug in, do the work, and stay in the streets.
Thank you. London, do you want to give us, what do you say, what's next? How do we keep the momentum in this movement to win, you know, this overall liberation that we're actually fighting for?
Yeah, everything that Dr. Abdullah said was spot on for what's happening in New York. The only other things that I will add for context for what's happening in New York is around the Defund NYPD campaign specifically that folks have been working on. And so I do believe that we gained a lot of traction with that campaign, and we were able to have people shift their narratives around what they think safety means and how police do not contribute to that, because like she said, we're clear that police don't make people feel safer, and that's not what we want to re-envision our safety to be. And so we were able to force council members and other elected officials to start having those conversations. But in the end, we still ended up with a budget being passed that didn't prioritize the needs of communities of color. And so we're at a point where it's that people that are advocating for on the behalf of defunding the NYPD and for this re-envisionment of public safety are on one side of the spectrum, and elected officials still may be having these conversations, but their votes show us that they're not prioritizing us, they're not prioritizing our communities, or to support us in developing a world in which we don't rely on police for anything. And so at this point, it's a matter of reducing the role of the police in our lives in every way that we possibly can, so that we can get to those different levels of safety that are community-based and that are people-oriented. And then also really fighting with Mayor de Blasio and city council members, even about this budget that they did pass, because they tried to make it seem like that there were cuts to the NYPD that actually just did not happen. There was a lot of inaccurate math. There was a lot of news stations publishing articles and making reports that the NYPD had been cut by about $300 million in some areas, and that they weren't going to get any overtime. And we know for a fact that those things just haven't happened from what was actually put out. And so there's this false narrative that you're supporting these communities and you're actually not, in practice and with your action, and that also needs to stop. So yes, people need to vote. Yes, people need to have conversations, but we also need to have elected officials that actually advocate on our behalf in the ways that show us in the long run that we are getting what we need, versus standing with us in moments that are for publicity stunts and for the sake of them potentially being reelected or whatever works in their best interest.
Yeah, and I'm gonna have to ask you to go next, Michael, because London brought in the responsibility of lawmakers. And, you know, we've got a lot of folks that look like us that are in position of power. We've got brown folks, Black folks, they look like us. They sometimes come from our communities. What is next for your colleagues, and how, and you know, Michael, I know you're always in the street with us. I mean, you've been in the street with us on the front lines, but what is next for those who have the power of the pen, who have legislative power to unwrite systemic structures that oppress us? What's next? You're on mute, Michael.
I was trying to be respectful. London was going ham, and I was about to rock with her. So first, the numbers that were mentioned and the points were mentioned is absolutely real. The whole cutting of $1 billion, that didn't happen. Like, they literally just moved money around, and that was a game that was happening there. I think that there's a reckoning happening where people are seeing very quickly that if you're not consistent, you're going to get called out, and you'll be voted out, and you'll be held accountable on that, right? That it is not enough just to say, yo, I rock with you, I believe in you, I stand with you. People are like, wait, hold on, but you took these votes 2 months ago, 2 years ago, 6 years ago. You've been real suspect on this. And I think we have, and it's something that is important, that we have too often been in a space that there was so few of us that were in these elected positions that we had a discomfort and a reluctance to call out nonsense and when people were being disingenuous. Now that we have more of us here, we have to be willing to call someone out regardless if they look like you. Like, wrong is wrong. Mm-hmm. And I do believe we are in a space that in this George Floyd, Breonna Taylor moment that we are in, there's been many other names, still more names. We understand that. But I think we got to understand that, at least here in New York, things finally started to move that we've been fighting on for a long time because what's been going on for the last 3-4 months, that we have to equally hold people accountable, elected and appointed, and be willing to remind people of the positions they took. So earlier this year, I didn't understand how folks were willing to vote on a budget here in New York State that cut Medicaid, sustained and had an increase on prisons, had no additional PPE. I didn't understand how that was happening. I didn't understand how people were comfortable approving an executive order that gave the governor more power unnecessarily, right? But simultaneously, we also have to be able to say, even if I'm not in the same chamber, I'm willing to call out city council members who are not able to say, it makes no sense whatsoever that if you have less money coming to New York, that in any way there should be any conversation about building new jails. That just doesn't make sense, right? And it's just wrong. And so we have this moment of reckoning that's going to happen here in the next 2 years when you have, I think, up to 35 city council seats next year. You have 4 out of the 5 borough presidents, if not all 5. You have the citywide electeds that are on as well. That this is going to force people quickly to get their mind right. Mm-hmm. You know, because to the point we were talking earlier about retirement for law enforcement, you know, people act differently when they see political retirement coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Anthony, let us know, let the folks know, people who are here watching, especially those on the West Coast. You know, this is a nationwide movement that we're seeing right now, and globally. We're seeing solidarity marches all over the country. Every city, they're having them across the globe. It's happening, right? This is our civil rights moment, right? And there are people who are watching that are like, I got to get involved. How do we keep what's next? Please share with us what you think is next.
Yeah, I mean, I echo the sentiments of what everyone's shared. I think the big focus for us right now is making sure a couple propositions get defeated here in California, and a couple propositions are elevated and they're passed, right? We're looking to bring back and reinstate affirmative action, provide voting rights for individuals on parole. And then my organization specifically is looking to defeat a proposition run by a Democrat, so-called Democrat, former law enforcement officer who's trying to roll back reforms, which will really set back not just obviously the prisons, but the spending that we're doing, right? And so there's opportunities to get involved in not just voting, but organizing, right? And being in fellowship with one another. And I think the other thing I want to really highlight is how are we creating the space, right, that it's not just criminal justice organizations or just Black and brown folk working on these issues, but around this idea, what Dr. Abdullah is talking about, reimagining safety and who is holding the responsibility of safety, right? And who plays that role. And so really looking at how we're building out coalitions across health, across education, across labor, across environmental issues, right? All of these issues are cross-cutting. And, you know, I mean, a big reason that's why I work on criminal justice issues, because it's really at the nexus of everything, of all the racism and all these other issue in environments. So, you know, making sure that we're bringing these other groups into the fold as well, because they all play a role in safety. And I think as we elevate those groups, you won't need police. As these groups, as we all take our rightful place in holding what well-being and safety looks like in health in a community, police won't be needed. So I think that's, you know, the work that we are doing in organizing and creating those spaces for, you know, folks that may be on our side, but don't know how their job has a nexus with what safety or justice looks like, and how we bring them into the fold.
Yeah, those other issues play a part. In the earlier segment, we heard about how even gentrification plays a part, and having our communities that are unsafe. We know that we see that here happening in Brooklyn and in Harlem, and now happening even in the Bronx. And what does that mean when you don't know the neighborhood and then you don't call the police on someone who you don't, you know, because you don't know? And so as we wrap up, I just want to give you guys a last chance to really drive it home on, you know, there are critics that say, well, if you defund the police, who's going to take care of real crime? And there's this idea that we need police for everything. And you started talking about it, Anthony. You know, we do need to look at the intersection of criminal justice reform and housing and health and education and all of these things. So for anyone that's sitting out there that's like, I don't know, but there's an uptick in crime happening right now. If we defund, this is, you know, a little bit dangerous. Just closing up from each of you, what do you say about that, about defunding, and how we're really looking to like reinvest in our communities for those critics who think that defunding is going to, you know, not allow police to do their job?
Well, we see an uptick in crime because we're in the midst of a pandemic with an economic fallout and people don't have what they need, right? So if we defund the police, we actually speak to that. If everybody has housing, if everybody has healthcare, if everybody has access to good jobs or an income that can provide them and their families with what they need, right, then we'll actually see crime go down, right? Most crime is crime of need. And it's really important to remember that the first thing that we have to do to create safe communities is meet the universal needs of people. We also have to remember, and then I'll be quiet, we also have to remember that police don't prevent crime, right? Police at most respond to crime that has already occurred, right? And they are not the best responders, right? So it's really important to remember that if somebody stole my cell phone, one, all I want is my damn cell phone back, right? Two, when we think about these responses are often more traumatizing to survivors of crime, and maybe Anthony can speak to this for a second, right? We need a survivor-centered approach to addressing crime, right? Survivor-centered approaches don't mean that victims of sexual assault want men coming into their house with guns and badges and further traumatizing them, right? So it's important that as we say defund the police, we understand that by defunding the police, we actually free up the resources to fund the things that actually create safe communities.
Absolutely. Anyone else? Final thoughts for the critics against defunding the police?
There was a pandemic of poverty, a pandemic of institutionalized racism, a pandemic of police brutality, a pandemic of lack of resources for our schools, long before the coronavirus pandemic. and to Dr. Abdullah's point, the reference here that defunding police would be problematic. Well, you defunded our schools, you didn't care about those things. You defunded our communities, you didn't care about those things. You defunded our CDFIs, you didn't care about those things. You defunded, when it came to public and affordable housing, you didn't care about those things. But whenever it came to actually funding the things we care about, there was always an issue there. You know, there's a lot of frames that we could talk through. Brian Stevenson has a line that has stuck with me. The opposite of poverty is not wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice. So let's talk through the dynamic. When you dialed 911, something already jumped off. Okay? So let's be clear about that. Let's be clear that what we are seeing in our respective states, take it here, New York and Cali, we obviously down south is hitting it hard, but we have watched our lives change forever because of a pandemic long before people started paying attention. And all we're saying right now, if you actually would spend time and energy to build schools and not jails, if you would actually lock up the folks that are killing our people, if you actually would hold people accountable in the first place, we wouldn't be having the levels of tension that are happening right now. So I wrap this by saying at the end of the day, I am tired for us apologizing for our existence. It's been mentioned, but let's make sure we don't ignore this. We think about the history, 1845 here and other places. This is here. Police are here because they were slave patrols. Right, let's not ignore the history and the lineage of all of this. If the whole premise was we are here to catch you and bring us back, you might have taken away the title of it, but it's still the same legacy. So we have to defund it, we have to change the dynamics, and we have to actually invest in our communities. 2020 is a year of perfect vision, and hopefully we're going to see the truth of what's going on in our communities right now.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Final words, London, Anthony.
For me, in my experiences, especially working with families, my first thought is that police officers don't need to be first responders for a lot of different situations that occur. We have so many people who are trained in many ways to de-escalate situations that will be much more appropriate to do so. And so a lot of this is frightening to people because of the rhetoric that's being shared in the media around this uptick in crime, but also just how different uprisings were portrayed in the media. And so there has definitely been a shift in what's being portrayed, but that doesn't mean that people still aren't going out in the streets and fighting for what they believe in. And that doesn't necessarily correlate to an uptick in crime. It's just a shift in what people are choosing to share on their news stations. And so just wanting to name that here, but also to be very clear that we have to start somewhere. And so there may be a need to just scaffold things in ways that feel comfortable for people once things have been discussed and we do have those transformative changes that address the inequities at the root. Is not ever going to be an immediate entire defunding of any police department realistically. And so the bigger thing for people to realize in these moments is that starting somewhere means a lot, especially in 2020, where we do have this sort of perfect storm with this pandemic, with all of these uprisings happening across the country, and with the movements that we've seen. There's a lot of power behind a lot of people in ways that can yield a lot of positive results.
Thank you. Thank you. Anthony, did you want to leave us?
Just really quick, I think Dr. Abdullah is right about survivor-centered, and who do we actually think of when we think of survivors, right? Or whose survivor voices get elevated? And I'm not saying that certain voices don't matter, right? But too often Black and brown voices in the survivor space are not listened to and not given value. And so really organizing and understanding trauma, right, and how hurting people hurt people. And hurt people, and how we respond to that. What I tell folks, and I have this conversation often with folks around the defund, when you think about police, they spend most of their time training with their guns. shooting, right? Using chokeholds, fighting. Like, what do you expect is the result going to be when you send police out? Like, that's what they are trained to do and conditioned to do. And we need something different. We need a different response. And so we need to be thinking about who's actually trained to do the work that we actually want to see the response. And we want to see folks respond with compassion and love and understanding. And so who are those folks that we need to invest in? So that's what I tell folks when this conversation comes up, and it's obviously coming up all the time. But what do you expect when police go out? This is what they get trained to do. So we need to look at a different model, a different way of thinking, and who should be responding, right? I'm a social worker by trade. And I don't necessarily think I should be responding to everything, right? Because I understand, oh, sorry, that's my puppy. Understanding where social workers have played a role sometimes having a racist history as well, right? And so really understanding and unpacking all these different sectors of life in the United States is important, and being educated on that, and really letting ourselves dream and hope, because that's where it needs to start.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're wrapping up, guys. I want to thank you guys so much, Dr. Abdullah, Anthony DiMartino, London Arnold, and Assemblymember Michael Blake. Thank you so much for being a part of this segment. I know it's late here in New York, but thank you so much for being a part of this town hall series. And hopefully our viewers were able to get what they need to be re-energized to keep the fight going. So I'm going to bid you farewell, and I'm going to bring back our lovely Miss Carmen Perez Jordan, who is going to close us out. Hey, Carmen. Carmen's gonna close us out and wrap us up. And thank you so much for this town hall, Carmen. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Karen. I just want to thank all of you who joined us tonight for We Keep Us Safe. Thank you to each and every one of our panelists who joined us. I hope that all of you were inspired by the information you received tonight. I also want to thank our partners, Justice Committee, Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, Inspire Justice, and Sisters of the Movement, as well as some of our presenting organizations, Californians for Safety and Justice and Until Freedom. Please follow these organizations that are doing the work on the ground. I also want to thank our media streaming partner, Roland S. Martin, who always supports the work that we do. Thank you so much, Roland. And also, please follow these incredible organizers who remain on the front lines of this work and of this movement. If you like what you heard tonight, please follow us at NY Justice League and at Gather #4 Justice on Twitter and Instagram. To keep up to date on our work, you can text Police Free Schools to 97779. That's 9 with 3 7s and another 9. And it's Police Free Schools. And finally, you could support our work by making a donation on Cash App at $gathering #4 Justice by texting The Gathering to 44321, or on our website at gatheringforjustice.org, all spelled out. Thank you again. Thank you to our team. Thank you to Roland. Thank you to the presenters. Thank you to the families. Your stories were so heartfelt. And thank you to everybody for tuning in. I hope that you received information. This is a series, so please keep following us. We will be having more coming up. Thank you so much. Goodbye.